The stars were dying, and Ambassador Kelrith knew it was only a matter of time before his own world joined them. He stood in the airlock of the human orbital station, his forearms trembling slightly despite his best efforts to maintain composure. His scaled skin, normally a proud shade of deep blue, had faded to a sickly gray over the past months. The weight of his mission pressed down on him like a collapsing star. Behind him, his two aides kept their heads bowed, afraid to meet the eyes of the human guards who watched them with cold, professional distance. 50 years. It had been 50 years since the Zorvathi Confederation had any meaningful contact with humanity. 50 years since they had demanded Earth withdraw from galactic affairs. 50 years since they had called humans too dangerous, too unpredictable, too aggressive to be trusted among civilized species. Now here he was, crawling back to beg for their help. The inner airlock door hissed open and a human woman stepped through. She wore a dark blue uniform with silver insignia that Kelrith had studied during his journey. Admiral Sarah Chen, Earth Defense Coordinator. Her black hair was streaked with gray, and a long scar ran down the left side of her face, disappearing beneath her collar. Her eyes were hard as stone. "Ambassador Kelrith," she said, her voice flat and emotionless. "Welcome to Sentinel Station. I'm told you have an urgent matter to discuss." Kelrith performed the traditional Zorvathi greeting, all forearms spread wide in a gesture of openness and vulnerability. "Admiral Chen, thank you for agreeing to see me. I know our peoples have not spoken in many years." 50 years, 3 months, and 17 days, Chen said without missing a beat, since the Confederation Council declared humanity a Category 4 threat species and demanded we cease all military operations beyond the Sol system. She paused, her expression unchanging. But who's counting? The bitterness in her words stung, but Kelrith had expected it. He deserved it. They all did. "Admiral, I come because we have nowhere else to turn. The Void Ravagers have broken through our final defensive line at the Korath Nebula. 3 of our core worlds have already fallen. We estimate we have less than 6 months before your civilization is extinct," Chen finished. She gestured for them to follow her down the corridor. "Yes, we've been monitoring the situation. We monitor everything, Ambassador. Just because you kicked us out of your club doesn't mean we stopped paying attention." They walked through the station, and Kelrith couldn't help but notice how different it felt from Zorvathi ships. Everything was efficient, minimal, purposeful. No decorative panels, no artwork, no comfort features. Just clean metal corridors and crew members who moved with military precision. It reminded him of a weapon more than a station. Chen led them to a conference room where a large holographic display dominated the center. She activated it with a wave of her hand, and Kelrith's heart sank as he saw the tactical map. Red markers showed Void Ravager movements, spreading across Zorvathi space like a plague. Blue markers indicated Confederation forces, far too few, retreating on every front. "We know what you're facing," Chen said, studying the display. "The Void Ravagers appeared in the Andromeda sector 7 years ago. They've consumed 14 star systems completely. They don't negotiate, they don't communicate, they just consume. Every fleet sent against them has been destroyed or assimilated." "Yes," Kelrith whispered. "We've tried everything." The Zentari sent their war swarms. The Kavron deployed their planet-killer dreadnoughts. The Helios Collective used their quantum disruption bombs. Nothing works. The Ravagers adapt, they evolve, they overcome. "We're losing, Admiral. We're dying." Chen turned to face him fully. "And the other species? The ones who voted with you to isolate humanity? Where are they now?" Kelrith's skin flushed darker with shame. The Zentari were the first to fall. Their hive worlds are silent now. The Kavron hierarchy scattered. We don't know where most of their ships fled to. The Helios Collective sealed their borders and refused to answer our calls. The others... He made a gesture of helplessness with his upper arms. "The others are trying to save themselves. There is no unity anymore. No confederation. Just scattered survivors waiting to die." "So you come to the species you called savage," Chen said. "The species you said was too violent to be trusted. The species you forced into isolation because you were afraid of us." She leaned forward, her scarred face intense. "Why should we help you, Ambassador?" "Give me one good reason." Kelrith met her eyes, his 3-lidded gaze steady despite his fear. "Because despite everything we said, despite how we treated you, humans are better than we are. Because you have always fought to protect the weak, even when they didn't deserve it. Because deep down, we always knew that if the galaxy truly faced extinction, Humanity would be our last hope. He paused. We were wrong to fear you. But we were right about one thing. You are the most dangerous species in known space. And right now we need that danger on our side. The room fell silent. Chen stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she tapped a control on her wrist and the holographic display changed. It now showed Earth and the Sol system, with various military installations marked in green. The Confederation Council made their position very clear 50 years ago, Chen said quietly. They didn't just ask us to stand down. They threatened us. They said if humanity didn't withdraw, they would consider it an act of war. Do you remember what happened next, Ambassador? Kelrith nodded slowly. The first contact incident. A pirate fleet attacked one of your colony transports. You sent a single cruiser to respond. Not just any cruiser, Chen corrected. The Resolution. Standard military vessel, nothing special, except for its crew. She pulled up a file showing images of a destroyed pirate armada. The Resolution found 63 pirate ships. Heavy cruisers, destroyers, fighter wings. By the time your Confederation observers arrived, there were no pirates left. Just debris. The Resolution hadn't called for backup. Hadn't needed it. I remember the report, Kelrith said softly. Your single ship destroyed an entire fleet. The pirates tried to surrender, but your captain refused. He hunted them down one by one. The observers said it was the most efficient and brutal combat operation they had ever witnessed. Captain Rodriguez, Chen said, a hint of pride in her voice. He followed his orders perfectly. Protect human assets, neutralize threats. He did both. But your people didn't see a hero defending his colony. They saw a monster. They saw what humanity could do when pushed, and it terrified them. She walked around the holographic display, her boots clicking on the metal floor. So they gave us an ultimatum. Stand down or face the combined might of the Confederation. We had a choice. Fight a war against the entire galaxy or step back and let you handle your own problems. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. We chose to step back. We withdrew to our own space. We stayed quiet, and you all thought you'd put the dangerous humans in their cage. Kelrith felt a chill run down his spine. There was something in Chen's tone, something that suggested the story didn't end there. But humans don't like cages, do we, Admiral? He asked carefully. No, Chen agreed. We don't. So while you all congratulated yourselves on containing the threat, while you built your fleets and formed your alliances and felt safe again, we were busy. Very busy. She tapped another control, and the display zoomed out to show markers scattered throughout human space. Deep space stations, research facilities, construction yards, all marked with a single symbol that made Kelrith's blood run cold. A ghost ship, barely visible against stars. What is that symbol? He asked, though part of him already knew. You've heard the stories, haven't you? Chen asked. Human children tell them. Spacers whisper about them in bars. Even some of your own people have picked up the tales over the years. She looked at him directly. The ghost fleet, ships that sleep between stars. Weapons that wait in the dark. An armada that exists in myth and nightmare. Those are just stories, Kelrith said, but his voice lacked conviction. Are they? Chen smiled coldly. Let me tell you what really happened 50 years ago, Ambassador. We didn't accept your demands because we were afraid. We accepted them because they gave us exactly what we needed. An excuse to disappear from your radar. An excuse to build without oversight. An excuse to develop technologies that would make the Confederation's treaties and restrictions completely irrelevant. She pulled up another file, showing ship designs unlike anything Kelrith had ever seen. They were massive, angular, covered in armor that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Weapon systems that looked more like organic growths than manufactured components. Drives that bent space in ways that made his eyes hurt to look at. We spent 50 years preparing for a war we knew was coming, Chen said. We studied every conflict in galactic history. We learned from your mistakes. We combined technologies that your treaties forbade. We created artificial intelligence that thinks faster than biological minds. We built weapons that operate on principles your scientists say are impossible. She paused. And we did it all in secret while you thought we were safely contained. By the ancestors, Kelrith breathed. The ghost fleet is real. As real as the station you're standing on, Chen confirmed. 13 capital ships, each one capable of sterilizing a planet or cracking a moon. Hundreds of support vessels. Weapons that violate every convention of civilized warfare. Crew members trained from birth to operate systems that would drive most species insane. She turned off the display. That's what humanity built while you weren't looking. That's what we have to offer. Kelrith felt his legs weaken and he sat down heavily in the nearest chair. His aides stood frozen, their scales pale with shock. Why, he finally managed. Why build such things? If you never intended to threaten us, why create such weapons? Because someone has to, Chen said simply. The galaxy is full of predators, Ambassador. Pirates, raiders, slavers, conquerors. And eventually, something like the Void Ravagers was bound to appear. Something that can't be negotiated with or bought off or scared away. Something that only understands strength. She sat across from him. Your confederation believed in rules and treaties and civilized behavior. That's admirable. But rules only work when everyone follows them. What happens when you meet an enemy that doesn't care about your rules? You die, Kelrith whispered. Exactly. So humanity decided to be the species that could face that enemy, the species that would do the things others couldn't or wouldn't, the necessary evil that protects the innocent. Chen's expression softened slightly. We didn't want this role, Ambassador. We would have been happy to join your confederation as partners, to contribute our strengths openly, but you forced us into the shadows. So we embraced those shadows. We became the monster under the bed, the nightmare that keeps other nightmares at bay. Kelrith sat in silence for a long moment, processing everything he'd learned. Finally, he looked up at Chen. Will you help us? We'll help, Chen said. But understand something, Ambassador. Once we deploy the Ghost Fleet, there's no going back. Your people will see what humanity is truly capable of. They'll watch us fight with a brutality and efficiency that will confirm every fear they ever had about us. Some of your people will call us saviors. Others will call us demons. But none of them will ever forget. I understand, Kelrith said, and I accept the consequences. Whatever you are, whatever you've become, you're our only hope. Chen stood and extended her hand in the human gesture of agreement. Kelrith wrapped his upper right hand around it, sealing the bargain. I'll need to make some calls, Chen said. Secure channels, old passwords, authorization codes that haven't been used in 50 years. Go to your quarters, rest, prepare your people. By morning, you'll have your answer. As Kelrith and his aides were escorted out, Chen returned to the conference room and stood alone before the holographic display. She pulled up a secure communication panel and began typing a message. Her fingers moved with practiced precision, entering codes that only a handful of people in the entire human government knew. The message was simple. Darkwatch Protocol, Authorization Omega. All Ghost Fleet vessels to activate and prepare for combat deployment. This is not a drill. Threat level extinction. Response level maximum. She sent the message and watched it disappear into the encrypted networks that linked Earth to the dark spaces beyond the Oort cloud. Somewhere out there, in the cold void between stars, something ancient and terrible was waking up. Chen touched the scar on her face, a reminder of the first contact incident and the day humanity had learned its place in the galaxy. You asked for our help, she whispered to the empty room. God help you all when you see what we've become. Far beyond Pluto's orbit, in the frozen depths where sunlight was just another distant star, proximity sensors began to activate. Massive shapes that had drifted silently for 5 decades began to stir. Power cores that had been in hibernation mode started their wake cycles. Quantum computers that had been dreaming began to wake. The Ghost Fleet was rising from its slumber, and the galaxy was about to remember why humanity had been feared in the first place. Kelrith couldn't sleep. The quarters Admiral Chen had provided were comfortable enough, certainly better than the cramped transport ship he'd arrived on, but his mind refused to rest. He kept thinking about Chen's words about the Ghost Fleet, about what humanity had become in 50 years of isolation. He rose from his sleeping platform and activated his personal data pad, deciding to use the time productively. If humanity was going to save his people, he needed to understand them better. The station's database had a public section accessible to visitors, and Kelrith began searching for information about human military history. What he found terrified him. Humans had been fighting wars since before they discovered fire. Their entire evolutionary history was marked by conflict, competition, and combat. They had developed thousands of different fighting styles, strategies, and weapon systems. They had fought over territory, resources, ideas, and sometimes for reasons that seemed to make no sense at all. Where other species had evolved cooperation as their primary survival strategy, Humans had evolved the ability to organize violence with terrifying efficiency. But it wasn't just their history of warfare that disturbed Kelrith. It was how they thought about it. Humans studied war like Zorvathi scholars studied poetry. They wrote entire books analyzing single battles. They created schools dedicated to teaching the art of combat. They honored their warriors with monuments and ceremonies. War wasn't just something humans did. It was woven into the fabric of their culture. As he dug deeper, Kelrith began noticing something strange. In dozens of human cultures, across different continents and time periods, there were references to fleets that waited in the dark. The names changed, the Wild Hunt, the Flying Dutchman, the Phantom Armada, but the core concept remained the same. Ghost ships that appeared in times of greatest need, crewed by the dead or the damned, bringing salvation or destruction. At first, Kelrith assumed these were just myths, the kind of stories every species told. But the references continued even into the modern era. Spacers' tales of ships spotted at the edge of sensors, gone before they could be confirmed. Military reports with entire sections redacted. Budget allocations for projects with no names. Construction facilities that officially didn't exist. You're learning about the legends, I see. Kelrith jumped, his scales rippling with alarm. A human man stood in the doorway of his quarters. He hadn't heard the door open. The man was older, with dark skin and gray hair, wearing civilian clothes. He smiled apologetically. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to startle you. I'm Dr. James Okonkwo, station historian. Admiral Chen thought you might have questions that the official databases couldn't answer." Kelrith's hearts were still racing, but he gestured for the human to enter. "Dr. Okonkwo, yes, please. I've been reading about the Ghost Fleet, but I'm having difficulty separating myth from reality." Okonkwo sat down, his movements careful and deliberate in the station's gravity. "That's because the line between the two is intentionally blurred. Tell me, Ambassador, what do you know about human psychological warfare?" "Not much," Kelrith admitted. "The Zorvathi don't really practice such things. Humans have been using it for thousands of years," Okonkwo explained. "The idea is simple. Sometimes the fear of what might happen is more effective than what actually happens. If your enemy thinks you have weapons you don't, they might surrender without a fight. If they believe you're capable of anything, they might not attack in the first place." He pulled out his own datapad and projected some images into the air between them. "When the Confederation forced humanity to withdraw 50 years ago, our leaders faced a choice. We could be angry and resentful, or we could be smart. We chose smart. We decided to become the thing that goes bump in the night, the shadow that other species see from the corner of their eye." "So the Ghost Fleet is just a psychological operation?" Kelrith asked, feeling oddly disappointed. "I didn't say that," Okonkwo replied with a slight smile. "I said we made people believe in it. We seeded the stories, encouraged the rumors, let the myth grow. But Ambassador, every good myth has a core of truth." He pulled up a star chart showing the Sol system and the space beyond. "Humans have a saying, the best place to hide something is in plain sight. We let the galaxy think the Ghost Fleet was just a scary story. Meanwhile, we were actually building it." Kelrith stared at the chart, seeing markers scattered throughout the outer reaches of human space. "How is that possible? The Confederation has monitoring satellites, trade inspections, intelligence networks. How could you build an entire fleet without anyone noticing?" "Because you were looking for the wrong things," Okonkwo said. "You were watching for military buildups near population centers, for shipyard activity, for resource shipments that might indicate weapons production. You weren't watching the empty spaces, the cold zones where nothing lives and no one goes. You assumed that because a place was hostile to life, it was useless." He zoomed in on one of the markers. "This is Station Darkwatch 7, one of 13 primary construction facilities. It's located in the Oort cloud, almost a light year from Earth. The temperature is barely above absolute zero. There's no breathable atmosphere, no natural resources. Nothing but ice and rock and darkness. Why would anyone build there?" "Because no one would look," Kelrith realized. "Exactly. We built in the places where your sensors couldn't reach, where your ships never traveled, where the very environment would kill anyone who tried to investigate. We used automated construction drones that could work for years without supervision. We developed new manufacturing techniques that didn't need the massive supply chains that would have triggered your economic monitoring. We were patient, methodical, and above all, secret." Okonkwo switched to another image, this one showing a ship under construction. It was massive, easily 3 times the size of the largest Zorvathi dreadnought, with a design that looked more organic than mechanical. This is the Ragnarok, one of the 13 capital ships of the Ghost Fleet. Took 12 years to build, another 3 years to test, and 5 years to train its crew. 20 years of work for a single vessel, all done in complete secrecy. What kind of weapons does it carry? Kelrith asked, unable to hide his fascination. That's classified, Okonkwo said, but I can tell you that it uses technologies your Confederation treaties explicitly ban. Weapons that manipulate time, that fold space, that operate on quantum principles most species haven't even theorized about. The Ragnarok isn't just a ship. It's a mobile weapons research platform, constantly evolving and adapting its systems. Kelrith felt a chill despite the comfortable temperature of the room. Dr. Okonkwo, I need to ask you something honestly. Are humans building these weapons to protect others or to conquer them? The historian's expression grew serious. That's the question, isn't it? The question that made your Confederation so afraid of us in the first place. He leaned forward. Ambassador, let me tell you a story. 200 years ago, before we had faster-than-light travel, before we met other species, humans nearly destroyed themselves. We had nuclear weapons, biological weapons, chemical weapons, all the tools we needed to make Earth uninhabitable, and we came very close to using them. What stopped you? Fear, Okonkwo said simply. We realized that the weapons we'd built were too powerful, too dangerous. We understood that having the ability to destroy everything meant we had to be absolutely certain we never would. It's called mutually assured destruction. The idea that if everyone has the power to kill everyone else, no one will start the fight because they know they'll die too. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. When we met the Confederation, we hoped we could leave that fear behind. We thought we'd found a community of species who had moved beyond such primitive concerns. But then the first contact incident happened and we realized something. The galaxy isn't any more civilized than Earth was. There are still predators out there. Still species willing to use violence to get what they want. The only difference is scale. So you built the Ghost Fleet as a deterrent, Kelrith said. Not just as a deterrent, Okonkwo corrected. As a final option. As the thing we use when everything else has failed. Yes, the ships are terrifying. Yes, they violate every principle of civilized warfare. But they exist for one purpose only, to face enemies that can't be stopped any other way. He turned back to Kelrith. The Void Ravagers are exactly that kind of enemy. You can't negotiate with them. You can't scare them away. You can only destroy them completely or be destroyed yourself. A chime sounded and Okonkwo checked his datapad. Admiral Chen is calling a briefing in 2 hours. You should prepare yourself, Ambassador. The Ghost Fleet is coming out of the dark, and once you see it, you'll understand why humans keep it hidden. After Okonkwo left, Kelrith tried to rest, but sleep still wouldn't come. Instead, he found himself watching the station's news feeds, seeing how human civilians were reacting to the news that their military was being activated for the first time in 50 years. The reactions were mixed. Some humans seemed excited, proud that their species was finally being called upon to help. Others were afraid, worried about what revealing the Ghost Fleet would mean for Earth's future. But most showed a quiet determination, a sense that this was what they had been preparing for all along. One interview caught Kelrith's attention. A young human woman, maybe 20 standard years old, spoke to a reporter outside a military recruitment center. My grandfather served on the Resolution during the first contact incident, she said. He never talked about it much, but I could see it weighed on him. He knew what humans were capable of, and it scared him. But he also told me that someone has to be willing to do the terrible things, to make the hard choices so that others don't have to. That's what he did. That's what I want to do. If the Ghost Fleet is real, if they need crew, I want to serve. The reporter asked her if she was afraid of what that service might require. Of course I'm afraid, the young woman replied. Anyone who isn't afraid of weapons like that is crazy. But fear is useful. It keeps you careful, keeps you from using power carelessly. My grandfather taught me that too. The day you stop being afraid of your own weapons is the day you become the monster you're supposed to be fighting. Kelrith turned off the feed, those words echoing in his mind. Humans understood their own nature in a way few other species did. They knew they were dangerous, and rather than deny it or apologize for it, they had learned to channel it, control it, use it for purpose. The briefing room was crowded when Kelrith arrived 2 hours later. Human military officers filled most of the seats. their uniforms bearing insignia he'd never seen before, probably Ghost Fleet personnel. Admiral Chen stood at the front, her face illuminated by the glow of tactical displays. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "as of 0400 hours this morning, all 13 Ghost Fleet capital ships have completed their activation sequences. They are running final systems checks and will be ready for deployment in 72 hours. She pulled up a star map. "The Void Ravagers are currently attacking the Zorvathi core worlds. Our mission is simple: stop them permanently." A murmur ran through the room. One officer raised her hand. "Admiral, what are our rules of engagement?" Chen's expression was cold as ice. "There are no rules of engagement, Commander. The Ravagers don't follow the conventions of war, so neither will we. You are authorized to use any and all weapon systems at your disposal. Your objective is the complete elimination of the Ravager threat. No survivors, no prisoners, no mercy." Another officer spoke up. "What about collateral damage? The Zorvathi have civilian populations in the combat zone. Minimize civilian casualties where possible," Chen replied. "But mission success is the priority. The Ravagers have already killed billions. If we have to sacrifice millions to save trillions, that's a trade we'll make." She paused. "I know that sounds harsh, but this is what the Ghost Fleet was built for. We're not peacekeepers. We're not police. We're the last resort, the option you use when everything else has failed. Act accordingly." Kelrith watched the officers' faces. They weren't happy about the orders, but they weren't arguing either. They understood the stakes, understood that they were being asked to do things that would haunt them for the rest of their lives, but they were willing to do it anyway because someone had to. Chen dismissed most of the officers, asking Kelrith and a few senior commanders to remain. "Ambassador, you'll be traveling with the flagship Armageddon. Captain Marcus Reeve will be your host. He's one of our best, and he'll make sure you understand exactly what you've asked us to unleash." "When do we depart?" Kelrith asked. "Tomorrow morning, station time. The fleet will rendezvous at Darkwatch Prime. Then proceed to your space at maximum speed. We estimate 72 hours travel time to the combat zone." Chen's expression softened slightly. "Ambassador, I want you to understand something. Once we engage the Ravagers, there's no turning back. The Ghost Fleet will be revealed and the galaxy will know what humanity has become. Your people will be grateful, but they'll also be terrified. That fear will shape human-alien relations for generations." "I know," Kelrith said quietly, "but the alternative is extinction. We'll deal with the fear." "I hope you're right," Chen replied, "because after tomorrow nothing will ever be the same." That night, Kelrith stood at an observation window watching the stars. Somewhere out there in the darkness, 13 massive warships were preparing to emerge from hiding. 13 vessels that represented humanity's darkest capabilities and greatest strengths. Ships that shouldn't exist, carrying weapons that violated every law of civilized warfare. Crewed by people willing to become monsters, so others could remain innocent. The Ghost Fleet was real, and soon the entire galaxy would know it. Kelrith pressed one hand against the cold glass and whispered a prayer to his ancestors. He prayed for the souls of his people, already lost to the Ravagers. He prayed for the Zorvathi who still survived, waiting for salvation. And most of all, he prayed for the humans who were about to sacrifice their innocence to save a galaxy that had rejected them. Behind him, the station's lights began to dim as it entered night cycle. But far beyond the station, in the cold depths of the Oort cloud, other lights were growing brighter. Power cores reaching full operational status. Weapon systems coming online. Shield generators warming up. The ghosts were awakening, and soon they would hunt. The humming grew to a roar. Kelrith's scales stood on end as static electricity filled the air. 3, 2, 1, activate. The universe twisted. Kelrith's 3 stomachs lurched as reality turned inside out. For an instant that lasted forever and no time at all. He existed everywhere and nowhere, seeing everything and nothing. He felt the ship around him existing in multiple states simultaneously. Here and there, then and now, real and unreal. His mind couldn't process what his senses were telling him, and he would have screamed if he could remember how. Then suddenly everything snapped back to normal. The windows showed different stars. They had traveled hundreds of light years in an instant, and Kelrith's body was still trying to understand what had happened. "Phase jump complete," Reeve announced calmly. "All systems normal. Estimated time to Zorvathi combat zone 71 hours. Kelrith slowly unstrapped from his couch, his limbs shaking. One of his aides was sobbing quietly. The other stared blankly at nothing, clearly in shock. A crew member approached a young human woman with kind eyes. "First phase jump is always rough," she said sympathetically. "Your bodies will adjust. Here, I'll show you to your quarters. You should rest." As they followed her through the corridors, Kelrith realized something. The crew members they passed didn't look disturbed at all. They moved normally, worked efficiently, showed no signs of the disorientation he was feeling. These humans had done this before many times. They had trained their bodies and minds to endure something that should have been impossible. In his quarters, Kelrith collapsed onto his sleeping platform and closed his eyes. But he couldn't rest. His mind kept replaying what he'd seen. The impossible ships, the terrifying weapons, the calm professionalism of crew members who had turned themselves into operators of machines that violated natural law. He thought about Reeves' words about restraint and responsibility. He wanted to believe the captain. He wanted to trust that humanity would use this power wisely. But deep down, Kelrith couldn't shake one terrifying thought. The Ghost Fleet wasn't just a response to the Ravagers. It was proof that humanity had always known this day would come. They had prepared for a war against the unkillable, the unstoppable, the inevitable. They had built weapons that could fight gods, and soon the entire galaxy would see them in action. Kelrith finally drifted into uneasy sleep. His dreams filled with images of dark ships sliding through twisted space, entropy beams aging stars to death, and 13 captains with eyes that had seen too much, commanding weapons that should never have been built. The Ghost Fleet was coming, and nothing would ever be the same. The transport shuttle carrying Kelrith emerged from its jump point, and immediately every alarm in his body began screaming. Ships surrounded them. Not normal ships. These were things that shouldn't exist according to the laws of physics as Kelrith understood them. They were massive, each one easily 4 or 5 times larger than the biggest Zorvathi dreadnought he'd ever seen. Their hulls were dark, almost black, but they didn't reflect light normally. Instead, they seemed to absorb it, creating distortions in space around them that hurt to look at directly. The shuttle pilot's voice came over the speakers, and Kelrith could hear the mix of pride and fear in her tone. "Ambassador, welcome to Darkwatch Prime. The 13 capital ships of the Ghost Fleet are assembled and ready for inspection." Kelrith counted them, his eyes moving from one impossible vessel to the next. Each ship bore a name painted in white letters that seemed to glow against the dark. Hulls: Ragnarok, Apocalypse, Thanatos, Kali, Armageddon, Nemesis, Fenrir, Shiva, Morrigan, Anubis, Hades, Azrael, Omega. Names of death, names of endings, names that every human culture had given to the concept of ultimate destruction. "By all the ancestors," one of his aides whispered. "They're beautiful and horrible at the same time." Kelrith had to agree. The ships had a terrible aesthetic beauty to them, like predators perfectly designed for killing. Their lines were sharp and angular, covered in armor plating that looked organic rather than manufactured. Weapons pods bristled from every surface, strange protrusions and openings that didn't match any weapon system Kelrith recognized. But it was more than just their appearance that disturbed him. Space itself seemed wrong around the ships. His eyes couldn't quite focus on them properly, as if they existed slightly out of phase with normal reality. When he looked directly at one ship, he could swear he saw it in 2 places at once, separated by just a fraction of a degree. "Phase drive technology," the pilot explained, noticing his confusion. "The ships exist partially in normal space and partially in subspace. Makes them harder to target, harder to track, and lets them do things conventional ships can't." The shuttle approached the largest vessel, the Armageddon, and Kelrith got his first clear look at a Ghost Fleet capital ship up close. It was shaped like a massive arrowhead, almost 2 kilometers from bow to stern. The hull was covered in hexagonal plates that constantly shifted and adjusted, like scales on a living creature. Weapon ports opened and closed in sequence, testing their mechanisms. Energy flickered along channels carved into the armor, creating patterns that looked almost like circuit diagrams or possibly ritual markings. The shuttle entered a landing bay that could have held a dozen Zorvathi cruisers, and Kelrith felt the temperature drop noticeably as they passed through the atmospheric shield. When the shuttle doors opened, cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of ozone and something else, something sharp and electric that made his scales tingle. A human officer stood waiting for them, flanked by 2 crew members in armor Kelrith had never seen before. The officer was a tall man with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much. His uniform was different from Admiral Chen's, darker with fewer decorations but more battle scars visible on the fabric itself. "Ambassador Kelrith," the man said, his voice rough but not unfriendly. "I'm Captain Marcus Reeve, commander of the Armageddon." "Welcome aboard." Kelrith performed his greeting gesture and Reeve nodded in response. "Thank you for having us, Captain. Your ship is impressive." "She's a monster," Reeve said bluntly. "But she's our monster and she's very good at what she does." He gestured for them to follow. "Come, I'll show you around and explain what you've asked us to unleash." As they walked through the corridors, Kelrith noticed how different the Armageddon was from any ship he'd been on. The lighting was dim, casting long shadows. The walls hummed with power, and he could feel vibrations through the floor that suggested massive systems running beneath. Crew members they passed moved silently, efficiently, with none of the casual chatter he'd expect on a military vessel. They looked focused, professional, and more than a little dangerous. "How many crew do you have?" Kelrith asked. "Armageddon has a complement of 247, Reeve replied. "Seems small for a ship this size, doesn't it? That's because most of her systems are run by quantum AI. The computers handle navigation, targeting, threat assessment, and about 90% of ship operations. The crew exists to make strategic decisions and handle situations the AI isn't programmed for." "That sounds dangerous," one of Kelrith's aides said. "What if the AI malfunctions?" "Then we die," Reeve said simply. "But the AI has multiple redundancies, constant self-diagnostics, and fail-safes built into every system. It's actually safer than having biological crew operating everything. Computers don't get tired, don't get emotional, don't hesitate. When we need to fire a weapon that can crack a planet, I want something absolutely reliable pulling the trigger." They entered what appeared to be an observation deck, with massive windows looking out at the other Ghost Fleet vessels. Reeve pulled up a holographic display showing the Armageddon specifications. "Let me explain what this ship can do," Reeve said. "Standard propulsion is quantum phase drive, which lets us exist partially outside normal space. Maximum speed is classified, but I can tell you we can cross from Earth to your homeworld in under 72 hours. For reference, that's a journey that takes your fastest ships 2 weeks. Kelrith's eyes widened. "That kind of speed shouldn't be possible without tearing the ship apart," Reeve continued. "Primary weapons are entropy cannons. They fire concentrated beams that accelerate time around the target. A ship hit by an entropy cannon doesn't explode, it ages. Metal corrodes, systems fail, crew members turn to dust in seconds. We can adjust the intensity from a few years to a few millennia." "That's horrifying," Kelrith breathed. "Yes," Reeve agreed without apology. "Secondary weapons include quantum disruption missiles that cause matter to forget it's supposed to stay together, gravitic shear cannons that create artificial black holes, and neural scramblers that overload the nervous systems of any biological crew. We also carry conventional weapons, railguns, plasma torpedoes, fusion bombs, but honestly, those are mostly for show." He pulled up another display showing the ship's defensive systems. "Shields are null-field generators. They don't block incoming fire, they make the incoming fire forget it was ever fired. Projectiles simply stop existing, energy beams dissipate into nothing. Even exotic attacks like temporal weapons or dimension-shifting munitions get erased before they reach the hull." "How is that possible?" Kelrith asked. "You can't just make physics stop working." "We're not making physics stop working," Reeve explained. "We're exploiting a quirk in quantum mechanics. At the smallest level, particles exist in probability states until they're observed. The null field manipulates those probabilities, making it extremely unlikely that any attack successfully reaches us. It's not perfect, sometimes things get through, but it's effective enough." He switched to showing crew quarters and life support systems. "The ship can operate independently for up to 5 years without resupply. We have manufacturing facilities on board that can create replacement parts, ammunition, even food if necessary. The AI can handle repairs automatically. In theory, we could fly to another galaxy and back without ever returning to Earth." "Captain Reeve," Kelrith said carefully, "I need to ask you something. These weapons, these systems, they're designed to fight enemies that are nearly invincible, but they could also be used against peaceful species. How do I know humanity won't turn these ships against us once the Ravagers are defeated?" Reeve was quiet for a moment, staring out at the other Ghost Fleet vessels. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "That's the right question to ask, Ambassador. The truth is, you can't know for certain. We have these weapons now and will always have them. The knowledge of how to build them can't be unlearned. He turned to face Kelrith directly, but I can tell you this. Every person serving on these ships volunteered knowing what they were signing up for. We've been trained not just in how to use these weapons, but in when to use them. We understand the responsibility we carry. He gestured to the crew members working at nearby stations. These people aren't psychopaths or warmongers. They're professionals who understand that sometimes, to protect innocent life, you need to be willing to do terrible things. But that doesn't mean we want to do them. Every weapon system on this ship has multiple authorization requirements. I can't fire the entropy cannons on my own. I need confirmation from Earth Command and approval from at least 2 other senior officers. The AI is programmed to refuse illegal orders. We've built safeguards into every system, but safeguards can fail, Kelrith pointed out. Yes, they can, Reeve admitted. And if they do, if humanity ever misuses these weapons, then your fears will be justified. But Ambassador, consider this. We've had these ships for decades. We could have used them to conquer, to intimidate, to establish dominance over the entire galaxy. Instead, we kept them hidden. We used them to protect human space only. We never even threatened anyone with them. He paused. That restraint is your best evidence that we're not the monsters you fear. A comm signal interrupted them. The battle was spreading now, becoming a chaotic 3-dimensional melee as Ghost Fleet vessels engaged Ravagers across cubic kilometers of space. The Thanatos was using some kind of directed energy weapon that made Ravager ships simply stop functioning, their organic systems shutting down as if falling asleep. The Fenrir had deployed what looked like enormous mechanical wolves that physically grappled with Ravager vessels, tearing them apart with claws made of exotic matter. But the Ravagers were adapting. Kelrith saw it happening in real time. Ships that survived the first attacks changed their tactics, their hulls morphing to better resist the weapons being used against them. They began working together in ways they hadn't before, coordinating their attacks with disturbing intelligence. They're learning, Kelrith said. The Ravagers, they're adapting to your weapons. We expected that, Reeve replied. That's why we're adapting too. All ships rotate to secondary weapon systems. Let's see how fast they can keep up. The Ghost Fleet vessels switched tactics. The Armageddon engaged its primary entropy cannons, firing beams that aged Ravager ships thousands of years in seconds. The Apocalypse, which had been holding back until now, activated some kind of reality-warping weapon that made space itself hostile to the Ravagers. Any ship that entered the affected zone simply stopped existing, erased from reality as if it had never been there. Kelrith's attention was drawn to a Zorvathi distress signal. One of the defending cruisers, the Pride of Kelvin, was surrounded by Ravager fighters. Its shields were failing, weapons offline, and it was seconds away from being torn apart. Captain, Kelrith said urgently. That ship, can you help them? Reeve didn't hesitate. Morrigan, target sector 7-7. Clear those fighters off our allies. A Ghost Fleet destroyer, the Morrigan, phase-jumped directly above the beleaguered Zorvathi cruiser. It deployed what looked like a barrier of pure energy, creating a protective dome around the Pride of Kelvin. The Ravager fighters slammed into the barrier and disintegrated on contact. Within seconds, the area was clear. Pride of Kelvin, this is Ghost Fleet vessel Morrigan, a human voice transmitted. Fall back to minimum safe distance. We'll handle it from here. Kelrith saw the response from the Zorvathi captain. A simple text message, probably all their communication systems could manage. Thank you. We thought we were dead. The battle raged for 3 hours. 3 hours of violence on a scale Kelrith had never imagined possible. The Ghost Fleet moved through the Ravager formations like knives through flesh, cutting, destroying, eliminating threats with terrifying efficiency. Every time the Ravagers adapted, the humans adapted faster. Every new tactic the Ravagers tried was countered within minutes. But it wasn't without cost. Kelrith watched as the Nemesis took heavy fire from a Ravager super capital, the kind of vessel that had single-handedly destroyed entire Zorvathi fleets. The Ghost Fleet ship's shields held but barely. Several weapon systems were knocked offline, and the ship had to retreat for repairs. The turning point came when the Ravagers deployed their ultimate weapon. At the center of their formation, a massive structure began to unfold. It was larger than any ship Kelrith had ever seen. A pulsating mass of organic and mechanical components grown together into something that hurt to look at. Energy gathered around it, space itself warping and twisting. What is that thing? One of the human officers asked. Singularity generator, Reeve said, his voice tight. They're going to collapse the star. If they succeed, the entire system will be destroyed, including Vorzan Prime and the 12 billion civilians on it. Kelrith felt his blood turn to ice. How long do we have? The readings are unclear, an officer replied, her fingers flying over her console. The energy buildup is irregular, but based on similar technology, maybe 30 minutes. Maybe less. Can we destroy it? Kelrith asked desperately. Not before it fires, Reeve said. The thing is shielded by half the Ravager fleet. We'd need to fight through hundreds of ships to reach it, and we don't have time. He stared at the tactical display, his jaw clenched. Unless what? Kelrith pressed. Reeve looked up, and Kelrith saw something he hadn't seen before in the captain's eyes. Fear. We have one option. The Apocalypse carries a weapon we've never field-tested. It's designed to counter reality-warping threats, but the theory is untested, and the power requirements are extreme. It might work. It might destroy us all. We don't know. What's the weapon called? Kelrith asked, though he dreaded the answer. The Genesis Breaker, Reeve replied quietly. It resets matter to its pre-atomic state, literally unmakes anything in its path, reducing it to the quantum foam that existed before the Big Bang. If we fire it at the singularity generator, it should unmake the generator before it can finish forming the black hole. He paused. But the weapon creates a massive energy feedback. The Apocalypse won't survive firing it, neither will her crew. The bridge was silent. Every human officer was looking at Reeve, waiting for his decision. It was a death sentence for 3,000 people aboard the Apocalypse, and everyone knew it. Kelrith stepped forward. Captain, you can't ask your people to. I'm not asking, Reeve interrupted. He activated the fleet channel. Apocalypse, this is Armageddon Actual. We need the Genesis Breaker on that singularity generator. Authorization Omega 77. Are you ready to proceed? There was a pause, then a woman's voice came back. Captain Helena Voss, commander of the Apocalypse. Her voice was steady, calm, accepting. Armageddon Apocalypse Actual, we copy. All crew are at their stations and prepared to execute. It's been an honor serving with you all. The honor was ours, Helena, Reeve replied, his voice rough with emotion he couldn't quite hide. Give them hell. On the tactical display, Kelrith watched the Apocalypse begin to move. It phase-jumped repeatedly, appearing and disappearing across the battlefield, drawing fire away from the other ships. The Ravagers threw everything they had at it, sensing its importance, but the Ghost Fleet vessel's shields held. Then the Apocalypse was directly in front of the singularity generator. Space around the ship began to distort as it charged its ultimate weapon. Energy readings went off the scale. Reality itself seemed to crack around the vessel. Genesis Breaker firing in 10 seconds, Voss reported. All Ghost Fleet vessels recommend minimum safe distance of 50,000 kilometers. And somebody better tell the good parts of our story. 9, 8, 7. Reeve had already given the order for all ships to retreat. The Armageddon and the rest of the Ghost Fleet pulled back at maximum speed. 3, 2, 1, firing. The universe screamed. A beam of pure uncreation lanced from the Apocalypse toward the singularity generator. Where it touched, matter didn't just explode or disintegrate. It ceased to have ever existed. The beam hit the generator, and reality itself seemed to recoil. The massive structure began to unravel, its atoms forgetting how to hold together, its energy dissipating into nothing. But the feedback was catastrophic. The Apocalypse was caught in its own weapon's backwash. The ship began to come apart, not from damage but from existence itself rejecting it. Kelrith watched, unable to look away, as 3,000 human lives ended in an instant. Sacrificed to save a world they had never visited and people they had never met. When the light faded, both the singularity generator and the Apocalypse were gone. The Ravager's ultimate weapon had been stopped, but at a terrible cost. The battlefield went quiet for a moment, as if even the Ravagers understood what had just happened. Then Captain Reeve's voice cut through the silence, hard and cold as ice. All Ghost Fleet vessels. That weapon was meant to destroy a star and kill 12 billion civilians. They just murdered 3,000 of our people stopping it. His voice carried weight, authority, and barely controlled rage. No mercy. No quarter. Hunt them down. Every single one. The Ghost Fleet attacked with renewed fury. The Ragnarok phase jumped into the Ravager command cluster and detonated every weapon system simultaneously, creating a blast that vaporized dozens of capital ships. The Kali's drones multiplied exponentially, consuming Ravager vessels faster than they could regenerate. The Armageddon itself became a storm of entropy fire, aging every Ravager it targeted to nothing but cosmic dust. The Ravagers tried to flee. For the first time since they'd appeared in the galaxy, they ran, but the Ghost Fleet was faster. Human ships pursued them across the system, hunting them down one by one. There would be no escape, no survivors, no chance for the Ravagers to ever threaten anyone again. Kelrith watched it all from the Armageddon's bridge, witnessing humanity's true nature. They weren't just warriors. They were apex predators who had evolved to hunt threats to extinction. And right now, covered in the blood of their own, they were the most dangerous force in the galaxy. The Vorzon system was dying. From his position on the Armageddon's bridge, Kelrith watched the tactical displays with growing horror. What had once been a thriving star system with 7 planets and 12 billion Zorvathi citizens was now a graveyard. 4 of the planets showed no life signs at all, just dead rocks stripped of their atmospheres and oceans. 2 more were in the process of being consumed, their surfaces crawling with the organic growths that marked Void Ravager occupation. Only Vorzon Prime remained intact, protected by the last remnants of the Zorvathi defense fleet. 23 warships, battered and desperate, orbited the planet in a defensive formation. They were all that stood between 12 billion civilians and certain death. And surrounding them, blocking out the stars, was the Ravager fleet. Kelrith had seen the Ravagers before, in intelligence reports and long-range scans. But seeing them in person was different. They weren't ships in any traditional sense, they were living things, grown rather than built. Each vessel was a mass of dark organic material, all curves and protrusions that pulsed with sickly bioluminescence. They ranged in size from small fighters barely larger than a person to massive dreadnoughts that dwarfed even the Ghost Fleet capital ships. The worst part was how they moved. Normal ships had engines, thrust vectors, predictable trajectories. Ravagers moved like sea creatures, flowing through space with impossible grace. They didn't follow the laws of physics, they seemed to rewrite them as they went. Ravager fleet composition, one of the bridge officers reported, his voice professionally calm, despite what they were seeing. Approximately 200 capital vessels, 800 cruiser class, several thousand smaller craft. Total biomass estimate suggests they've consumed at least 3 planetary ecosystems to reach this size. Captain Reeve stood at the command station, his face illuminated by tactical displays. He studied the formation carefully, his expression unreadable. Time to Zorvathi fleet collapse? 3 hours, maybe less, another officer replied. They're low on ammunition, their shields are failing, and they've lost 40% of their point defense systems. The Ravagers are just wearing them down. Kelrith watched a Zorvathi cruiser on the display suddenly bloom with light as its power core overloaded. 1,500 crew gone in an instant. His heart ached, but there was no time for grief. Not yet, Captain, he said quietly. My people are dying. Please tell me you can help them. Reeve turned to face him, and Kelrith saw something in the human's eyes. Not excitement or eagerness for battle, but a cold, professional determination. We can help them, Ambassador. But you need to understand what's about to happen. Ghost Fleet doesn't fight like your people do. We don't have honor codes or rules of engagement. We don't offer surrender terms or take prisoners. When we engage, we're going to kill everything in our path until the threat is eliminated. He paused. Some of your people might be disturbed by what they see. They'll be alive to be disturbed, Kelrith replied. That's all that matters. Reeve nodded and turned back to his crew. All stations battle status. Weapons free. Shields to maximum. All ships prepare for combat deployment. He activated the fleet-wide channel. Ghost Fleet, this is Armageddon Actual. We have Ravager forces engaged with friendly units. Mission parameters are simple. Total elimination of hostile bioforms. Authorization code Omega-77. Execute. Throughout the fleet, weapon systems that had been dormant for decades came fully online. Entropy cannons charged with enough power to age entire ships to dust. Quantum missiles armed themselves, ready to unravel the bonds holding matter together. Gravitic weapons spun up, preparing to tear holes in space itself. Kelrith watched as the 13 Ghost Fleet vessels began to spread out, forming a formation that looked almost organic itself. They moved with the same impossible grace as the Ravagers, sliding through space in ways that made his eyes hurt. Phase drives to combat mode. Reeve ordered. Let's show them what real predators look like. The Armageddon seemed to shimmer, and suddenly Kelrith was seeing double. The ship existed in two places at once, separated by a few kilometers, both versions perfectly solid and real. The other Ghost Fleet vessels did the same, creating a maze of overlapping positions that would make targeting them nearly impossible. Entering weapons range in 30 seconds, an officer reported. Ravagers are detecting us. They're redirecting forces. On the tactical display, Kelrith watched as hundreds of Ravager vessels broke away from the Zorvathi fleet and oriented toward the Ghost Fleet. They moved quickly, their organic hulls rippling with preparation for combat. They're fast, Reeve observed. Good, so are we. All ships weapons free, fire at will. The Ragnarok struck first. The massive Ghost Fleet vessel shimmered and suddenly appeared in the middle of a Ravager formation, having phase-jumped directly into their midst. Before the Ravagers could react, the Ragnarok opened fire with every weapon it had. Entropy beams lanced out, striking a dozen Ravager capital ships simultaneously. Kelrith watched in horrified fascination as the organic vessels began to rot, their hulls decaying and fast forward. In seconds, ships that had been alive and thriving became ancient, crumbling husks that broke apart into dust. The Ravagers counterattacked, launching waves of biological projectiles and energy beams. They struck the Ragnarok shields and simply ceased to exist, erased by the null field generators before they could make contact. Kaylee, you're clear, Reeve called out. Deploy swarm systems. Another Ghost Fleet vessel, the Kali, released clouds of small objects that at first looked like debris. But as Kelrith watched, the objects began to move with purpose. They were drones, thousands of them, each one barely larger than a human fist. They spread out like a swarm of insects, moving in coordinated patterns that suggested hive intelligence. The drones reached a cluster of Ravager cruisers and attached themselves to the organic hulls. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the Ravager ships began to tear themselves apart from the inside. The drones were eating through the biomatter, consuming it and replicating themselves in the process. Within minutes, each infected ship had spawned thousands more drones, which immediately moved on to new targets. Self-replicating weapons, Kelrith whispered. You created self-replicating weapons. With strict time limits and shutdown codes, Reeve replied, not taking his eyes off the tactical display. The drones will deactivate automatically in 6 hours or immediately, if we transmit the termination signal. We're not stupid enough to create something we can't control. The last Ravager ship died 3 hours after the apocalypse fell. It was a small vessel, barely the size of a Zorvathi frigate, and it had tried to hide in the debris field of a destroyed moon. The Armageddon found it anyway. There was no dramatic battle, no final stand. Captain Reeve simply ordered the entropy cannons to fire, and the ship aged to dust in seconds. No survivors, no mercy, just as he had promised. Kelrith stood at the bridge window looking out at what remained of the Vorzan system. The space where the battle had raged was now a graveyard of organic matter and twisted metal. Pieces of Ravager ships floated everywhere, slowly breaking apart. Here and there, wreckage from Zorvathi vessels drifted among the alien remains. Reminders that this victory had cost both sides dearly, most painfully. There was an empty space where the apocalypse should have been. Just empty void, marked only by a navigation buoy the Ghost Fleet had placed there. 3,000 human lives gone in a flash of light, sacrificing themselves for a world they had never called home. Scan complete, a bridge officer reported, her voice hoarse from hours of constant communication. No remaining Ravager signatures detected in the system. All hostiles eliminated, Reeve nodded slowly. He looked exhausted, his face pale and lined. Kelrith realized the captain probably hadn't slept in over 40 hours. Confirm with Ragnarok and Thanatos. I want a triple check on those scans. If even one Ravager cell survives, it could regenerate the entire fleet given enough time. Already confirmed, sir, another officer replied. All Ghost Fleet vessels show negative on biosignatures. The Kali deployed sensor drones throughout the system. Everything is dead. Good, Reeve said quietly. He activated the fleet-wide channel. All Ghost Fleet vessels, this is Armageddon actual. Threat eliminated. Stand down from combat status. Begin search and rescue operations for any Zorvathi survivors. He paused. And prepare memorial protocols for the apocalypse. We'll honor our dead properly. Kelrith approached the captain carefully. Captain Reeve, I don't have words for what your people just did. You saved us. All of us. We did our job, Reeve replied, not looking at him. That's all. It was more than a job, Kelrith insisted. The apocalypse, those 3,000 crew members, they gave their lives for my people. For strangers who rejected humanity 50 years ago, that's not just duty, that's sacrifice. That's heroism. Reeve finally turned to look at him, and Kelrith saw something broken in the man's eyes. Heroism is what we call it after the fact, Ambassador. In the moment, it's just fear and training and the hope that your death means something. Captain Voss and her crew didn't want to die. They wanted to go home, to see their families, to live long lives. But they had a weapon that could save billions, and using it meant dying. So they did it because someone had to. His voice cracked slightly. Don't make them into myths, Ambassador. Remember them as people who made an impossible choice. Before Kelrith could respond, a communication came through from the planet below. A Zorvathi military frequency, crackling with interference but clear enough to understand. Unknown vessels, this is Defense Coordinator Tharn of Vorzan Prime. We detected massive combat operations in orbit. What is your status? Are the Ravagers defeated? Reeve gestured for Kelrith to respond. The ambassador stepped up to the communication station, his four hands trembling slightly. Coordinator Tharn, this is Ambassador Kelrith. The Ravagers are gone, all of them. The Ghost Fleet of Earth has arrived, and they have saved us. There was a long silence. Then Tharn's voice came back, filled with disbelief and hope. The Ghost Fleet? The human legends? They're real? Very real, Kelrith confirmed. And very deadly. 12 Ghost Fleet vessels remain in orbit, along with what's left of our defense forces. The system is secure. 12 vessels? Tharn asked. The readings showed 13 ships arriving. Kelrith felt his throat tighten. One was lost in combat. The apocalypse sacrificed itself to destroy the Ravager singularity weapon. Without them, none of us would be alive. Another long pause. When Tharn spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. Then we owe the humans a debt that can never be repaid. Ambassador, please convey to the Ghost Fleet that Vorzan Prime wishes to honor their dead properly. We will build a monument in their memory, the largest our world has ever seen. I will tell them, Kelrith promised. Over the next several hours, the Ghost Fleet worked alongside Zorvathi survivors to assess the damage and begin rescue operations. The Morrigan and Fenrir deployed shuttles to search for escape pods and life signs among the debris. They found 17 Zorvathi ships that had survived the battle with their crews intact, and dozens of smaller craft that had managed to escape the fighting. But they also found evidence of how close the system had come to total destruction. The 2 planets the Ravagers had been consuming were completely dead now, all organic matter stripped away, atmospheres gone, just barren rocks that would take millions of years to recover naturally. The Zorvathi fleet had been reduced from over 200 vessels to 23. An entire civilization had come within hours of extinction. Kelrith was given permission to tour the Armageddon more extensively, while rescue operations continued. He walked through corridors where crew members worked silently, efficiently, their faces showing the emotional toll of the battle. He visited the medical bay where injured personnel were being treated, not from enemy fire, but from the extreme stress of operating systems that pushed human biology to its limits. In one observation lounge, he found a group of off-duty crew members sitting in silence, staring out at the space where the apocalypse had been. They weren't crying or talking, just sitting together, sharing the weight of loss. One young woman noticed him and gestured to an empty seat. Kelrith sat down carefully, unsure if his presence was welcome. "Did you know anyone on the apocalypse?" the woman asked quietly. "No," Kelrith admitted. "I only met Captain Voss over communications." "I did," the woman said. "My brother was one of her engineering officers. Marcus Voss, same last name as the captain, but no relation. He used to joke about it. Said if anyone asked, he'd claim to be her long-lost cousin to get better assignments." She smiled sadly. "He sent me a message before the battle. Said he was excited to finally do something that mattered, after all the years of training and waiting. I guess he got his wish. I'm so sorry," Kelrith said. "Don't be," she replied. "Marcus knew what he signed up for. We all did. When you join the Ghost Fleet, you accept that you might be asked to die for people you've never met, for reasons you might never fully understand. It's the price of having this kind of power." She looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. "You asked for our help, Ambassador. This is what that help costs. Not just equipment and fuel and ammunition, lives, Human lives spent to save others. Kelrith felt the weight of that truth settle on him. How do you bear it? The knowledge that you might be asked to die at any moment? The woman shrugged. By remembering why we're here. Someone has to stand between the innocent and the monsters. Someone has to be willing to pay the price. If not us, then who? She stood up. Excuse me, Ambassador. I need to get back to my station. As she left, Kelrith sat alone with his thoughts. He understood now in a way he hadn't before what the Ghost Fleet really was. It wasn't just weapons and ships and advanced technology. It was a group of people who had chosen to carry a terrible burden so others wouldn't have to. They had made themselves into weapons, knowing that weapons were used and broken and discarded when the fighting was done. 2 days later, a memorial service was held for the crew of the Apocalypse. All 12 remaining Ghost Fleet vessels assembled in formation around the coordinates where the ship had fallen. Kelrith was invited to attend from the Armageddon's observation deck. Along with representatives from the surviving Zorvathi fleet, Captain Reeves stood at the front of the observation deck, his dress uniform pristine, his face composed but his eyes showing the grief he couldn't quite hide. Behind him, the crew of the Armageddon stood at attention, and throughout the fleet, Kelrith knew thousands of other crew members were doing the same. We gather here to honor the fallen, Reeve began, his voice carrying through the speakers to every ship in the fleet. 3,047 souls who gave their lives so that others might live. They knew the cost. They paid it willingly. And we will never forget them. He read the names. All 3,047 of them. It took over an hour, but no one moved, no one spoke. Every name was honored, every life acknowledged. Kelrith listened to the litany of the dead and felt tears running down his scaled face. These were humans who had died for his people, and he would remember every name for the rest of his life. When the last name was read, Reeve nodded to his weapons officer. Fire the salute. The 12 Ghost Fleet vessels fired their weapons simultaneously, not at any target but straight up into the void. 12 beams of pure energy, visible for light seconds in every direction, a declaration to the universe that these deaths mattered, that these lives had meaning. Then they launched the memorial beacon. It was a simple device, really. A quantum transmitter that would broadcast the names of the fallen for the next 10,000 years, ensuring that anyone who passed through this system would know what happened here and who paid the price. This time, Reeve said quietly, we chose protection this time, but Ambassador, humanity is still evolving, still changing. We can't guarantee that in 100 years or 1,000 years, some future generation won't decide to use the Ghost Fleet for conquest instead of protection. That's the risk you take by knowing we exist. Then we'll have to trust that the same values that made you risk everything to save us will guide your children and grandchildren, Kelrith replied. It's not a perfect solution, but it's better than the alternative. Reeve smiled slightly. You're wiser than most, Ambassador. I hope your people listen to you. He extended his hand in the human gesture of farewell. Take care of yourself, and if you need us again, you know how to call. Kelrith gripped the captain's hand firmly. I pray to all my ancestors that we never need to call, but I'm grateful beyond words that you'll be there if we do. He was escorted to a shuttle that would take him down to Vorzan Prime. As he left, he took one last look at the Armageddon, at the dark, angular vessel that had appeared from nowhere and changed everything. Then the shuttle descended, carrying him back to a world that had been saved by ghosts. On Vorzan Prime, Kelrith spent the next months helping coordinate relief efforts and writing his report. As promised, he told the truth about the Ghost Fleet's power, about the Apocalypse's sacrifice, about Captain Reeves' words of warning. He wrote about weapons that shouldn't exist and people who wielded them with terrible responsibility. The response from what remained of the Confederation was predictable. Some species hailed humanity as saviors and called for them to be welcomed back into galactic society. Others were terrified and argued for even stricter isolation. A few suggested preemptive strikes against Earth while they still could, though those voices were quickly silenced by the reminder of what had happened to the Ravagers. In the end, the Confederation settled on a compromise. Humanity would not be isolated, but neither would they be fully welcomed. Trade would be permitted, diplomatic relations established, but with restrictions and monitoring. The Ghost Fleet would be acknowledged but never officially recognized. Earth could have allies, but not full membership in the Confederation. It was a half measure that satisfied no one but prevented outright conflict. Kelrith was appointed as the official Zorvathi liaison to Earth, a position that required him to travel back to Sol System regularly. On one such visit 6 months after the Battle of Vorzan, he requested a meeting with Admiral Chen. They met in her office on Sentinel Station, the same place where this had all begun. Chen looked older now, the stress of revealing humanity's secret weapon having taken its toll, but her eyes were still sharp, still alert. "Ambassador," she greeted him. "I've read your reports. You've been honest about what you saw." "I promised I would be," Kelrith replied. "Admiral, I need to ask you something. Was it worth it? Revealing the Ghost Fleet, losing the apocalypse, changing humanity's relationship with the galaxy forever?" Chen was quiet for a long moment, staring at the star map on her wall. 12 billion Zorvathi civilians are alive because of what we did, she finally said. 3,000 humans died to make that possible. From a pure numbers standpoint, the math is simple, but that's not really what you're asking, is it? "No," Kelrith admitted. "I'm asking if humanity can live with what they've shown the galaxy. If you can live with being feared as much as you're respected." "We already lived with that," Chen replied. "The first contact incident made us feared. The 50 years of isolation made us mysterious. All we did was confirm what everyone already suspected, that humans are dangerous when cornered and effective when unleashed." She turned to face him. "Can we live with it? We don't have a choice. The Ghost Fleet exists. The knowledge of how to build such weapons exists. We can't unlearn it or unmake it. So yes, we'll live with being feared. We'll live with being the species others call when they're desperate. We'll live with the burden of being the galaxy's last resort. And if someday someone decides humanity is too dangerous to be allowed to exist?" Kelrith asked. Chen smiled coldly. "Then they'll learn why we built 13 ships instead of just one. The apocalypse is gone, but 12 others remain. And Ambassador, between you and me, those 12 ships are already building replacement vessels. We'll never be at less than full strength again. The Ghost Fleet is permanent now. The galaxy will just have to decide whether we're guardians or threats." "For what it's worth," Kelrith said, "I believe you're guardians. Scary, brutal, overwhelming guardians, but guardians nonetheless." "I hope you're right," Chen replied, "because if we ever become the threat instead of the solution, there won't be anyone strong enough to stop us." Kelrith left that meeting with mixed feelings. He believed in humanity's good intentions, believed that people like Chen and Reeve would use their power responsibly, but he also understood the risk, understood that power corrupted and absolute power corrupted absolutely. Years passed. The Zorvathi rebuilt their worlds, erecting monuments to the fallen human crew of the apocalypse. Other species began cautiously establishing relations with Earth, drawn by curiosity and the hope of gaining humanity as an ally rather than an enemy. The Ghost Fleet remained hidden but known, a presence felt throughout the galaxy even when not seen. Kelrith continued his work as liaison, building bridges between humanity and the Confederation. It was slow, difficult work, but gradually the fear began to give way to understanding. Not trust, not yet, but at least understanding. On the 10th anniversary of the Battle of Vorzan, Kelrith returned to the system with a delegation of Zorvathi officials. They visited the memorial beacon, still broadcasting the names of the Apocalypse crew, still honoring the dead. The monument on Vorzan Prime had been completed, a massive structure of crystal and steel showing 13 ships rising from darkness into light, with the Apocalypse at the center, forever frozen in the moment of its sacrifice. At the dedication ceremony, Kelrith gave a speech that was broadcast throughout Zorvathi space and beyond. 10 years ago we faced extinction, he began. The Ravagers had destroyed everything in their path and we had no answer for them. In desperation we turned to the species we had rejected, the species we had called too dangerous to be trusted. And humanity answered our call not with anger or resentment but with sacrifice. He gestured to the monument. 3,047 humans died here so that billions of Zorvathi could live. They used weapons that should never have been built, fought battles that will give them nightmares for the rest of their lives, and became the monsters they needed to be to stop a greater monster. That is the truth of humanity. They are capable of terrible things, but they use that capability to protect rather than to conquer. Some still fear them. Some still argue that the Ghost Fleet should be dismantled, that humans should be forced to give up their weapons. But I say this, the universe is full of threats we cannot imagine, enemies we cannot predict. And when those threats appear, when conventional forces fail and civilized options are exhausted, we will need humans. We will need their willingness to do what others cannot. We will need their strength, their determination, and yes, their capacity for controlled violence. Let this monument stand as a reminder not just of who we lost, but of who saved us. Let it remind us that sometimes the scariest guardian is the one you need most. And let it remind humanity that with great power comes great responsibility, a responsibility they have so far borne with honor. The speech was well received by most, though some species still grumbled about humanity's weapons. But Kelrith noticed that trade with Earth increased after that more species sought diplomatic relations, that the calls for humanity's isolation grew quieter. That night, alone in his quarters, Kelrith received an encrypted message on an old emergency channel. It was text-only, untraceable, but he knew who it was from. Still watching. Still ready. Thank you for remembering our dead. Ghost Fleet. Kelrith smiled and sent a simple reply. We will never forget. And we pray we never need to call you again, but we're grateful you're there. The message confirmed as delivered, then the channel went silent. Somewhere in the darkness between stars, in the cold places where no one lived and few dared to go, 12 ships continued their eternal vigil. The Ragnarok, Thanatos, Kali, Armageddon, Nemesis, Fenrir, Shiva, Morrigan, Anubis, Hades, Azrael, and Omega, waiting, watching, ready. And in the construction yards, hidden in the Oort cloud, a 13th ship was slowly taking shape. Larger than the Apocalypse had been, more advanced, more powerful. They were building a replacement, ensuring the Ghost Fleet would always be at full strength. Because humanity had learned the hardest lesson, that peace was only possible when someone was strong enough to enforce it. That innocence could only survive when someone else was willing to sacrifice their own. That sometimes, to protect the light, you had to embrace the darkness. The Ghost Fleet was that darkness. And as long as they remained in the shadows, the galaxy could sleep peacefully, knowing that if the monsters came again, humanity would be there. Scary, brutal, overwhelming, but there. Always there. Still watching. Still ready. The guardians in the dark.